I'm at a distinct disadvantage. I've had no internet for 5 days. I'm somewhere else now, but none of my big devices work or connects. And so I'm on my little phone. So I hope you will bear with me if I lose a connection or something happens, as it's likely to, then Greg will take over. Um, this is the first meeting for me as chair. It's an inauspicious way to begin, and for Greg as vice chair. And I don't want to take. I'll wait till February, and Greg and I'll both do a little bit of an intro to the year and to our term and to what we've learned from chatting with most of you. There's still a few to go. Um, that's been a wonderful process. But today, because this is a short meeting for a specific purpose that we have, we'll skip all that and go right to the business at hand. So Guthrie, if you will call the roll, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the Commission. I will now call roll. Sandy Rowe.
Here.
Greg Heyman.
Here.
Rukaya Adams. Natalie Arnott.
Present.
Rachel Biscoe.
Here.
Terry Cross. Richard Devlin.
Here.
Helen Edwards.
Here.
Arnell Fajardo. Evelyn Coker.
Here.
Fernando Rojas Galvan.
Present.
Emily Simnett. Motutama Sapelli.
Here.
Gail Yamasaki.
Here.
Thank you. That is roll, Chair, and we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And everyone, I hope you'll bear with me. I'm not going to be able, once we get into the presentation, if you have questions, since I'm on this little tiny phone screen, I probably won't see you because most of your pictures are not here. So either Guthrie or Greg or Ben, identify yourself and just jump in, but say who it is, please, because I'm not going to be able to properly call on you, or to manage the agenda for that matter, because I can't share the screen with your little pictures and with the agenda. And I haven't been able to print out for 5 days either, because I haven't been able to get out of my house until today. So anyway, we're gonna muddle along, and fortunately all I have to do is steer the ship a little bit, but everyone else is doing the work. So is there any public comment, Guthrie?
We have no public comment signed up so far, Chair, and I have not seen any additional in the chat.
Okay, good, thank you. Ben, are you starting us out, or is it Jim?
No, I'll start us out, Chair
Good,
Rowe,
thank you.
and lead the presentation here. Really appreciate commissioners setting aside this hour for what represents really a culmination of a lot of work that HECC staff and importantly partners from our technical and regional universities, faculty, staff, and student leaders have been involved in over the last 6 months or so. This is an action item, so it will culminate with a recommendation from staff to the commission to endorse a legislative request that we are suggesting you make for the upcoming 2024 legislative cycle. And this is all in connection with funding that the legislature set aside during the last session, the 2023 session, to support financial sustainability at our technical and regional universities and Portland State University. And the mechanism that they used for that was to deploy a portion of the $25 million that they allocated in the last legislative session, deploy a portion of that quickly, which we've done and the technical and regional universities have spent, but to reserve the remaining 18 and some million in an account that we need to go to the legislature and request, and with a report for them to release. So that's the nature of the request today. Guthrie, do you want to operate the slides, or should I? I'm happy to pull them up.
I can pull them up. I have them ready in the PDF format.
Yeah, that would be great. Before I get going with the slides, I'll spend about 10 or 15 minutes in the presentation here. I'm joined by Kimberly Coops from Oregon Institute of Technology and Christopher Walsh from the Interinstitutional Faculty Senate. Both of them have been really key participants in the work group that has devised these recommendations for your consideration today, and they'll follow me and share their perspective on the process and the recommendation for HECC action today. If you go to the next slide. Just a reminder of the HECC strategic roadmap, the sort of goals that we're oriented around under the last strategic plan that the Commission adopted. And note that the presentation here will spend a little bit of time on background and then move into the problem statement and then conclude with our recommendation for Commission action. Next slide. So this is what I outlined for you already, the initial 6.1 million that the legislature set aside for this project that we have allocated to the technical regional universities, a $100,000 appropriation for a study that the National Center for Higher Education Management has completed, and the remaining 18.7 million, which is the primary focus of the action today that we're recommending you make, that you present to the legislature. Next slide. So the product that comes before you today is the result of a work group process. And I mentioned this work group was put together with representatives from each of the institutions, faculty, staff, and student leaders over the summer. And that work group has operated with a set of assumptions that are described on this slide. These assumptions reaffirm the governance system that we have, where the HECC and the state does not directly govern our institutions, that they are overseen by independent university boards that are responsible for budgeting and setting priorities of the institutions. And they are responsible ultimately for ensuring the financial viability, sufficiency, sustainability of our higher education institutions. These assumptions call out the HECC's role in fostering collaboration and coordination, and helping steward or observe and report on financial viability, and in particular the role that public resources play in supporting financial viability across our system. Finally, the work group sort of understood from the outset with these assumptions that the purpose, that the purview of this process would not be to review the public university funding distribution formula that the HECC administers, that constitutes the largest ongoing state investment in public universities, that would be outside the scope of this work group, although some of the recommendations that the work group developed could inform a future HECC or HECC and partner review. Next slide. So we've been in this pretty intensive process. I just want to emphasize the time that it has required our institutions and staff, student, and faculty partners to set aside for really deep and extensive discussions of how to use one-time funding to support the financial sustainability of these institutions. You get a sense here of the membership. I want to call out the role that Oregon Solutions played in helping facilitate the work group, helping drive towards a consensus that is represented in the recommendation that we're making today, and was really confirmed even within the last hour that this work group has established, as of today, has established a full consensus behind these recommendations, and the facilitation role that Oregon Solutions played really helped in that process. Next slide. Next slide, Guthrie. Here you see the rough timeline that the work group used and the HECC used to get to the point where we are today. I won't go into much detail here. You'll see references to, and you have in your packet of materials, a proof of concept report that was required by the budget note from the legislature last year that set all this in motion. That was submitted to the HECC and to the work group in mid-December. And again, in accordance with the timeline set out by the budget note, we are making a recommendation to the legislature for the release of the remaining $18.7 million and a process that the HECC will use to make to enter into agreements, make grants to the institutions for the expenditure of those funds. Next slide. The proof of concept report itself came from the 5 universities. It reported on their initial spending of the roughly $6 million, the projects that they undertook with that funding. Because that work began, that funding was released just in late summer or early fall, there isn't much evidence about the outcomes of those initial investments that the universities made, but you're of course welcome to review how the universities use that initial tranche of funding. That report, that December 15th report, also included ideas for sort of current thinking on the university's part about projects that they would like to fund using the remaining $18.7 million. Next slide. All right, so a little bit on the kind of fiscal context that resulted in this budget note and this process that we're discussing today. This slide notes, and commissioners have seen this type of data before, but it notes the roughly decade-long trend of declining student enrollment at the 5 universities, Western Oregon University, Eastern Oregon University, Southern Oregon University, Portland State, and Oregon Tech. So here you see their combined enrollment decline, and that has consequences for their revenues, given the fact that these are tuition, that revenue for these institutions is very much tuition dependent. The work that our contractor and NCHEMS did to sort of pull out this and other data that you'll see noted that most of these enrollment losses were concentrated among white students. Actually, the Hispanic Latino student population has increased across these institutions. There's variety between them, so there's not a single story that fits all 5 institutions. Among that, the ways they vary is in the extent that they serve adult students. I noticed a hand. I'm not sure. I can't tell from my screen who that is, but I'm happy to stop and address any questions that may arise from Commissioner.
Commissioner Coker?
Yeah, I was wondering about the comparison of the losses among white students at Portland State versus the numbers of white students enrolled at Oregon institutions as a whole.
Commissioner Coker, I don't have that data right in front of me, but it is we certainly have it and would be happy to follow up with that detail.
That'd be great, thank you.
One of the overall conclusions that the contractor here helped us to reach is that with this enrollment decline, plus what we project about the number of high school graduates that Oregon can expect to see going forward, it will be really critical for these institutions to reach adult learners. And many of them are already very much focused on that population as a source of future enrollment. Next slide, Guthrie. In addition to sort of strategies to grow the enrollment base via, for example, adult learners, the report also emphasizes the degree to which retention, completion, and transfer students represent important opportunities for these institutions to sustain or grow enrollment. There's some conclusions described on this slide or findings on this slide related to retention and completion rates relative to other institutions and national averages for their respective sectors. Clearly, these institutions have room to grow. They recognize that, and much of the work that the institutions undertook with the initial tranche of funding and what has been proposed with additional funding would support retention and completion efforts at the institutions. Next slide. I referred to our projections going forward. What does the future hold? Again, familiar information for most commissioners that Oregon's population over the next 25 years will become older, more diverse, and will be distributed differently around the state. Again, the emphasis here on the declining number of projected high school graduates or traditional college age students, that sort of 18 to 24-year-old demographic. The fact that that decline is also being experienced by many, although not all states in the country, including California, where Oregon has drawn some students historically. So that has implications for our institutions. The increasing diversity of Oregon's learners, and particularly those traditional college-age students, that we need to recognize and reflect in our strategies. The report calls on the fact, or notes the fact, that Oregon's the proportion of Oregon high school students who go on to college or university is lower than national average, and that too represents an opportunity for these institutions to grow enrollment. So there isn't there are opportunities, even as the demographic trends are challenging, through retention, completion, transfer students, and increasing the proportion of high school students who consider and attend post-secondary education. There are some opportunities in this space. Next slide. We spent some time considering in our NCHEMS in particular, spent some time considering projected workforce needs. You see here again data that this commission has seen before. It comes from the employment department. It projects average annual openings by occupation type. We do expect in Oregon to see a rise, an increase in the number of jobs that require a bachelor's degree or above. There's more information in the report about regional variation. But one of the findings of the report is that really for these institutions to concentrate and focus on their mission and scope is important, because it's not a viable option for all of them to simply increase enrollment by try to increase enrollment by expanding their scopes. To that, there's not enough. The population in Oregon is not great enough or expected to grow enough for them to grow simply by growing their scope. They'll end up running into each other. Next slide. Looking more closely at the financial position of these 5 institutions, I'll read the quote here at the top of the slide from the NCHEMS report. The overall picture indicates fragility, although none of the 5 are in a moment of emergent crisis. They are vulnerable to extraordinary financial pressures. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about their respective financial positions. We present to you an annual report that goes in university by university and explores their specific financial position. But broadly speaking, all have been operating at an operating loss for most of the 5-year period that we analyzed for this report. Only one of the 5 has sufficient reserves compared to national benchmarks for what is an appropriate level of reserve. And there is a lack of capacity to cover long-term debt, generally speaking, if repayment was necessary. We think these conclusions, these findings are broadly shared by the institutions themselves. There are quotes here on the right-hand side of the slide that come directly from the institutions' recent audit statements that reinforce this sort of understanding of the fragile financial position that these institutions are in. That being said, I do want to emphasize that, and the report makes this point as well, that they're not in equivalent situations. There's a need for each institution to understand its particular strengths and vulnerabilities, and the report explores that to some extent. Next slide. The NCHEMS found, as they looked around the country, that Oregon's approach to addressing financial issues through this sustainability fund is truly unique. They identified only one other state in the country that had taken anything like a comparable approach to trying to get ahead of financial viability issues through investments of state dollars to support institutional transformation. And so for them, and I think for the work group, this represents a really important and unique opportunity for us to change, sort of bend this financial trajectory of these institutions through the infusion of one-time funds. Next slide. In a sense, a summary, changing statewide demographics that are challenging, enrollment challenges that impact revenue, opportunity to grow retention, all in currently in fragile positions, and all with unique approaches to sustainability. Next slide. All right, so moving towards the kind of recommendation for a process that we would use to deploy the 18 million, assuming the legislature supports this request. We describe on this slide a 6-step process that would continue to involve work group members, a sort of subset of them, plus 1 or 2 external members to evaluate projects against sets of criteria that are described in your docket item and in the report. So essentially what is laid out on this slide is a process for moving from the legislature approval of the 18 million to the HECC, to the HECC's grant execution with the 5 institutions for specific projects. The HECC role would be to facilitate the assessment team in its evaluation of specific projects against the criteria. Our staff will be in particular looking for opportunities to build collaboration where there's potential for that amongst projects, help provide feedback on projects along with members of the assessment team, ensure that any projects that are proposed for funding meet sort of state requirements for the suitable use of state funds. And we've also established or are proposing establishing a kind of funding ceiling by institution to help maximize clarity for each institution, their understanding that they will be eligible to receive up to the amount specified in the report. And they're not guaranteed that amount, but they'll be eligible to receive up to that amount and give them the assurance that they can take the time that's required to build a really good project proposal, get feedback from the assessment team before moving to grant making by the HECC. Next slide. The first set of criteria that the assessment team would apply are called essential criteria, and this really constitutes a go or no-go decision by the assessment team for any project that's proposed. Those criteria are listed in the green box of this slide, and some of this language comes directly from the budget note. A proposed project will have to demonstrate evidence of potential or actual realignment of offerings and resources with enrollment and economic realities. It will need to meet definition that we've included in the report for financial sustainability. Basically, these have to be projects that actually do show evidence of their likelihood to increase revenue or decrease expenditures on an ongoing basis using one-time funds. These need to be projects that have had meaningful campus engagement or will have meaningful campus engagement in their development and, as appropriate, their execution. And they need to be aligned with the HECC's strategic roadmap. Next slide. Assuming that a project receives a yes, that it meets those essential criteria, our assessment team will engage in an iterative feedback process, looking more deeply at the project, and the questions that are in the brown box on this slide provide feedback to the proposing institution that can help strengthen a project before we get to a grant agreement. And you see the types of questions that the feedback team will be asking and supporting our institutions in considering as they further develop their project concept. We think this is an important way for the assessment team, advised and facilitated by HECC staff, to find those opportunities for potential collaboration, find opportunities to improve the project, ensure that the right folks at the institution and potential other partners are engaged, and really sort of strengthen through a learning process and what will, in many respects, I think, resemble a kind of interview with the proposing institution and then a feedback session. Next slide. So finally, our recommendation for your consideration is that you request from the legislature the release of the $18.7 million general fund that had been set aside into a special purpose appropriation for grants that the HECC would make to PSU and the TRUs. Our recommendation to the legislature, assuming you are supportive, would acknowledge the work group's consensus about the process that we would use to make those funding decisions, and the criteria that would be applied. And it would recognize the agreement that we've reached at the work group about the funding caps, that PSU would be eligible for up to $7 million of the 18.7, with each of the other TRUs, each of the TRUs eligible for up to $2.3 million. The remaining $2.5 million would be reserved for collaborative projects undertaken amongst multiple institutions. The grants would be awarded by June 30th, 2025, although we expect many of those would, if not most of them, would be awarded much earlier than that, given the work that's already occurred at the institutional level to help design these many of these project concepts that may be ready for assessment team review very soon. Next slide, unless that is it. That is it. So with that, Madam Chair, I want to invite Kimberly Coops and Christopher Walsh to share their perspective in just a few minutes, and then reserve the balance of the time for discussion and commission action.
That's fine. Please go ahead. Is Kimberly first, or?
I'm happy to go next. Chair Rowe, Vice Chair
Okay.
Hammond, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Kimberly Coops, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Government Relations at Oregon Tech. Thank you for your service to our state and commitment to equitable student success, college affordability, and access. On behalf of the 5 institutions to receive sustainability funding, thank you for the opportunity to present today and share the experience and perspective that we've had throughout this process. First, I just want to say that we are grateful for the partnership with HECC, students, faculty, and classified staff in addressing the long-term financial sustainability of PSU and the TRUs. This issue is one that has always been of the utmost importance to our institutions. Our institutional governing boards, as you know, are fiduciaries for our universities. Along with our presidents and other institutional leaders, they look towards the future and make decisions to address budget shortfalls, enrollment challenges, and other economic realities. We have been working with the work group and stakeholders, as Director Cannon mentioned, on these proposals and processes for over 6 months, but our institutions and boards have been working to address our financial realities for much longer. For example, as part of SOU Forward, Southern Oregon cut 83 positions and fiscally realigned, which is expected to save $9 million in recurring costs. In recent years, SOU also invested in recruitment tools and strategies that have resulted in 3 years of continuous recruitment growth. Additionally, they put in place mental health retention strategies that have changed the dynamic so that mental health is no longer the primary reason for students leaving the university. Similarly, Western Oregon cut $5 million during its last budgeting process with an elimination of over 40 vacant positions. Oregon Tech has also made difficult budget decisions to adjust to today's economic realities, the most recent example being that we cut 1.9% or $1.7 million from our E&G budget in FY24. Eastern Oregon identified retention and completion as a critical sustainability factor in 2021. And in 2022, partnered with Treasure Valley Community College and Blue Mountain Community College to launch Moonshot for Equity, with the goal of implementing best practices in equity, retention, and completion for 2- and 4-year students in Eastern Oregon. This project was launched in 2022 with support from Governor Brown and is continuing now with resources from the sustainability funds. Further, this project creates a model that can be leveraged and shared throughout the state with both community college and university partners. In 2022, Portland State partnered with the Huron Consulting Group to conduct a comprehensive review of university support services and operations. This project is a direct response to the financial pressures and challenges the university has experienced over the past several years, with an ultimate goal of recognizing the vital work of university staff in pursuing PSU's core mission and determining what steps PSU can take as an institution to make that work both more effective and rewarding. The support services and operational review is just one part of an overarching effort to achieve financial sustainability at Portland State, and that also includes increasing enrollment in both undergraduate and graduate programs, the Office of Academic Affairs progress on closing the gap and academic program review and reduction, and strategic investments in future-focused innovation. You can see by these examples that financial sustainability has been and continues to be something our boards of trustees, institutional leadership, and our shared governance partners have as top of mind. We appreciate the support of the governor and the legislature in recognizing our diverse needs in 2023. When the governor's recommended budget was released with $15 million to address financial sustainability at Oregon's technical and regional universities, our presidents were excited to formalize their sustainability work, collaborate, and learn from each other. The true presidents met regularly throughout the legislative session to discuss ideas and share the challenges that their institutions were facing. As first-generation students themselves, they share a commitment to not just financial sustainability, but to addressing the challenges that too many students from historically underserved backgrounds face when attempting to access post-secondary education. Throughout the 2023 legislative session, our presidents, institutional leadership, including our trustees, and students advocated for this funding. We all care deeply about ensuring that these institutions continue to serve Oregon well into the future. Portland State also joined the efforts to advocate for this funding, sharing the similar enrollment and financial challenges that their institution is facing with legislators. As we met with legislators, the message that we heard over and over again was that our institutions play a unique and critical role for the state, and we are a critical access point for Oregon students. We also heard an interest in ensuring that these institutions continue to serve Oregon. When the legislature approved the initial tranche of sustainability funding and placed a second tranche in a special purpose appropriation, representatives from our institutions began meeting on a weekly basis, including Portland State University, as they joined in these efforts and received funding. Our 5 presidents continue to meet regularly, and in August, with the assistance of Oregon Solutions, a consensus process began as senior leaders at every institution met to discuss how to use this funding to not just create long-term financial sustainability at our institutions, but to work collaboratively towards a transformation of higher education as we know it in Oregon. This collaborative work group grew to include representation by students, staff, and faculty, and the HECC has been a partner in this from the beginning. And we are grateful for the inclusion of these voices in the process. Concurrently, each institution had a collaborative process engaging their campus communities to share potential uses of the sustainability funding and to gather feedback from students, staff, and faculty. This feedback informed, and in some cases generated, the proposals that you saw in the December 15th report. As you know, in that report that we submitted, it detailed both first tranche proof of concept projects and proposals for how institutions may use second tranche funds to further long-term sustainability at both the individual institutional levels, but also at a longer-term collaborative level. The discussions on longer-term collaborative initiatives that we would like to pursue are ongoing, so specific collaborative proposals were not included in that report. The statewide work group, including students, staff, and faculty, remain committed to delivering these collaborative efforts, and we remain mindful of those important conversations taking place, which support our shared priorities. As we move forward together, our institutions appreciate the HECC's willingness to ensure an expedient process that addresses the urgency of this issue. Our presidents and boards, as I said, have long been concerned about financial sustainability. But as the NCHEMS report indicates, we are all in unique places regarding financial sustainability. Thus, there are unique and different institutional approaches. These needed funds will allow our institutions to realign programs and institutional offerings, address revenue shortfalls, and meet our changing economic and enrollment realities. I do want to stress that $25 million in one-time funding split between 5 universities will not, in and of itself, create long-term sustainability at our institutions. While this is a unique and significant investment, it will not transform higher education alone. This is an angel investment, and we hope that through the remainder of this process, it will be treated as such. We are grateful to the HECC and to NCHEMS for collaborating on a peer review process that places an emphasis on both thoughtfulness and timeliness for grant approval that will allow projects to be assessed during spring term so that institutions are hopefully able to implement key initiatives before the next academic year. We owe it to our students and to other stakeholders to thoughtfully implement this work in a timely manner. Finally, financial sustainability, I will reiterate, is a critical issue that is constantly on the minds of our leadership and our boards. They are partners in this work. At Oregon Tech, our board received an update on this process just last Friday during their board meeting, both in the written government relations report and live report from President Naganathan. As I mentioned earlier, our trustees joined us in Salem during the legislative session to advocate for this funding, and as fiduciaries, they remain committed to strengthening the financial position of our institutions. Thank you for the opportunity to share our story of this process and our perspective with you today. We join Director Cannon in his recommendation, and we especially appreciate your commitment to ensuring that all of Oregon's universities have the necessary resources to provide a path to opportunity for Oregon students. And we hope to work with you in the future to make the case for transformative investments so that Oregon no longer ranks near the bottom nationally for per student funding for our public universities. Our students and our state deserve a thriving higher education ecosystem, and we appreciate your partnership and leadership in working towards that goal.
Christopher?
All right, thanks, Kimberly. Thanks, Ben. Good morning, commissioners. I'm Christopher Walsh. I'm an associate professor of chemistry and biochemistry at Eastern Oregon University. I'm also the current president of the Interinstitutional Faculty Senate. If you're not familiar with the IFS, we're a statewide body for faculty governance composed of faculty senators from each of Oregon's public universities. And for my comments today, I'm also speaking on behalf of the representatives of AFT, AAUP, SEIU, and the Oregon Student Association who participated in the work group. IFS, the labor representatives, and the OSA are extremely grateful for this opportunity to participate in this discussion of how best to use the True Plus funding to support our students and our institutions. As you've heard, EOU, Western, Southern, OIT, and PSU are facing a diverse set of substantial financial challenges, including Oregon's changing demographics. The NCHEMS report highlights the demographic realities that we must face on both an institutional and a statewide level, but also identifies opportunities for growth. The January 15th report provided by the TRUES plus PSU includes numerous thoughtful concepts driven by campus engagement, which we feel will support the future financial viability of the institutions and remove obstacles to student success. However, these opportunities require time, thought, and investment in order to thrive. Throughout the work group process, our faculty, labor, student subgroups, discussions, and interests have been focused on the project assessment process and criteria. We agree with the NCHEM's recommendation for a review process that is robust and meaningful and provides the opportunity for actionable feedback and identification of potential collaborations. This review is necessary to ensure that state funds are efficiently used to provide financial support for our institutions while also respecting the interests of faculty, staff, and students. In our opinion, the assessment process and criteria developed by the work group meet these goals, are appropriate and equitable, and reflect the input of all the parties involved in the work group. IFS, labor representatives, and the OSA are all committed to continued participation in the assessment process to ensure the involvement of our campus communities. We appreciate and support the proposals provided by the institutions in their December 15th report, but remain hopeful that additional opportunities for collaboration can be identified. Accordingly, we support the agreed upon per institution caps with a portion held for collaboration and the possibility of future reallocation of unused per institution funds to the collaborative pool. It's also important that this review process be efficient and timely. The process developed by our work group allows for the utilization of the thoughtful work already done by the TRUs and PSUs, and we hope will allow for the assessment and approval of many of the proposed projects in time to be implemented for academic year 2025. We encourage the Commission to endorse this proposal so the assessment team can begin their work. I'd like to thank you all for your ongoing efforts in support of Oregon's colleges, universities, and higher ed students. I'd also like to thank Director Cannon and the HECC staff for their help throughout this process. We recognize and appreciate the work done by NCHEMS and the institutions to provide the proposals, data, and context to support the work group's discussions, and to Oregon Solutions for their help facilitating these discussions. I thank you all for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Christopher. Commissioners, are there any questions for either of our presenters or for Ben on this material before we go into a more detailed discussion? I see hands raised. Looks like Commissioner Yamasaki and Commissioner Heyman, if I'm seeing correctly. Commissioner Yamasaki, why don't you go first?
Okay, great. Thanks for the report. So maybe, Ben, you can help me understand with the proof of concept report on that slide where they suggest that projects noted they were worth pursuing, but failing to understand their potential impact is a missed opportunity. Can you kind of elaborate on that comment in the proof of concept report for me?
Yeah, so that is a characterization of what NCHEMS, our contractor, found as they evaluated or reviewed the December 15th submission by the universities. And really, it's a reflection of the very compressed timeline. So it shouldn't be understood as a sort of negative characterization of the proof of concept projects themselves, but rather of a process driven by the legislative calendar that doesn't allow or didn't allow for a full sort of consideration of the impact of those proof of concept projects before we reached this point of needing to go to the legislature in February. So it's really just it's a comment about the truncated timeline that forces us to go into tranche 2 and begin this process of awarding grants for the second round of projects before we've had a real opportunity to see the results of the first round of university spending decisions.
Perfect. So just one other follow-up on that. So the funding request now in the first pot of awards, was there also a set aside for collaborative projects, or is this 2.3 the total amount requested for collaborative projects? Because it really brings me back to that third piece on the proof of concept report, that the evidence suggests collaboration is key. Report proposes to use some funding for collaborative projects, but none were noted. So was there not set aside the first time? And so therefore, because of this recommendation, we are recommending a set aside for collaborative projects this time?
Yeah, that's about right, that there wasn't a formal set aside within the first tranche of funding. However, I should note, and it shows up, I think, in the NCHEMS report and certainly in the December 15th report, that the universities chose to use a small portion of their combined $6 and some million of funding for a certain amount of collaborative work that included actually support for our facilitation through Oregon Solutions. It supported the consolidated report writing that produced that December 15th report. So there was some collaborative spending in the first round, but this set aside, that 2.5, I'm not looking at my material, but that set aside is focused solely on tranche 2. And we hope very much that we'll receive from the universities and work with them on proposals that could be funded, collaborative proposals that could be funded out of that set aside.
That sounds great, because, I can appreciate the collaboration for the writing and the assessment of the proposal, but it would be nice, as the concept report says, that I know the short amount of time, but I'm really interested on outcomes of the money that we've allocated.
And Commissioner Yamasaki, if I may just add to Director Cannon's comments in regards to your question, as I touched on in my remarks, the institutions wanted to be mindful of the conversations that the statewide work group, including students, staff, and faculty, have had about potential collaborative efforts. And so we want to be mindful of those ongoing discussions and ensure that those voices are a part of that process.
Thank you. Commissioner Hayman?
Thank you, Chair Rowe. I don't really have a specific question. It's more of a comment, which more will feed into perhaps greater discussion. As I reviewed the recommendation, it kind of looked like HECC's involvement ends somewhere at once the funds, the projects are identified and approved and funded. And I think I just want to, I'm very cognizant of the challenges associated with making, I guess, what Kimberly referred to as transformative change is a terribly difficult task and requires ongoing effort and all variety of things. And I'm just, these are, we have set for ourselves a very substantial goal of really changing the fiscal direction of these institutions in transformative ways. I do think that our fiscal challenges are in some ways symptomatic of shifts in the environment and where we work. There are economic shifts, there are political shifts, there are demographic shifts, there's technology shifts. All of those are impacting the financial viability and stability of these institutions. So the solutions are not going to be simple, they're going to be complex. And I'm just really want to think about the role that HECC can play, not just in handing out the money, but in then how do we become engaged in the implementation and sort of collaboratively keeping our efforts very clearly focused on the kind of change that we really think needs to occur in order to provide for that fiscal stability that we're looking forward. I really appreciate the presentations, the comments that you've added. I'm supportive of the recommendation, but I'm going to continue to be sort of anxious about or concerned about how we keep our efforts focused on and truly successful in creating that long-term, not just short-term, but long-term result of financial stability for these critically important institutions.
Thank you, Commissioner Hayman. Those comments are very helpful. I have some comments, a few comments also. Yes. Yes, Commissioner Devlin, is that you?
This is, yes. I am a few minutes late. I've been circling blocks here at OHSU on Riverfront. I have a pre-surgery appointment that I'm a few minutes late for. Is there a quorum problem if I leave?
No, sir, there is not, and I'll be glad to update you later if you text me and phone call.
Okay,
Thank
I'm
you
going to
for
go
trying
ahead and head into the underground parking garage.
Okay, thank you for trying, Commissioner Devlin.
And Chair Rowe, I see
don't
Commissioner Edwards has her hand up as well.
Commissioner Edwards, please go ahead.
Ben, in terms of the next round of strategic planning, a dual question. One, what's do you have some specific feedback from this or input from this that's going to inform the strategic planning process? Like, what's that delta? How's this shifting things? And regarding sort of Amy's world, what about data? What different data are we looking at gathering as useful, that kind of support for the strategic planning out of all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner Edwards. I would say that the overall sort of findings and themes that are in this report and presentation are reflected in the strategic planning kind of documents and trajectory that I've provided previously to the commission, especially the section that notes some of the sort of underlying trends that our institutions, particularly these institutions, but also many of our community colleges are facing: demographic, technological, the economy, political, et cetera. So those are, I think we are incorporating or have been incorporating sort of the learnings from this process and from the NCHEMS report into the strategic planning materials that we're working with all of you on. In terms of data, most of what we've generated, or what NCHEMS has generated for the purpose of this report, is also familiar to the commission, although they've taken some additional steps to put it in a sort of national context. So I think there are some findings, some data findings here that can help the commission, help illuminate some of these issues for the commission. Other data, I'll have to think about, the question about Amy, and other data that would be valuable, so sort of coming exposed, or that this process has exposed a need for us to generate or use. I'll need to think about that and hear perhaps from others ideas about that.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have a few comments, if you'll indulge me. Reading all of this week, the last 5 days, on an iPhone, no less. So I couldn't spread the pages very big, but and I'm supportive of this, as Commissioner Hayman said he is. The NCHEMS report, especially, I think, puts some things into sharp relief that I want our participants in this to hear from the commission level. And also, because it's such a concentrated reading in such difficult circumstances, if I'm completely off base on some of this, I really want to know. And some of this is repetitive of what you've heard. But what I did after I went through all the documents presented to us is sort of step back and say, okay, what do we know from this, and what do we want as a commission? And the things we know, I think, are the things that have already been highlighted. That we have, first of all, that all of us, the participants in this, the schools themselves, the legislature, certainly the commissioners, we all have a shared goal to see these 5 institutions as financially strong. And that is the number one guiding force. We know that they are not in, as the NCHEMS report said, not an emergency now, but we absolutely know that they're economically fragile, as that report noted. And that's a serious situation. So that's one of the knowns. We know that the trends for the future, as been pointed out in the slides, are negative in terms of enrollment. We know that each of these institutions, even the ones that so far have been more financially successful, have to grow retention in order to make up some of this ground. And we know while each of them may have unique paths to sustainability, they will all be strengthened through collaboration. And I think by collaboration, the way I'm reading collaboration, there's been very good collaboration that's really evident in all the work in coming together and deciding how to split up the money and deciding the processes and where there are going to be questions. And that's important and critical at that stage. But the way I'm reading and interpreting collaboration in all of this is real projects and work about the biggest problems that is collaborative. So if retention is the biggest problem, then we should be able to see, I would think, all 5 institutions working on retention in a way that shares that what they learn. We also know, and I maybe should have listed this first, we know that the spirit and the purpose of the funds approved by the legislature is to seed substantive change. This is a quote, which is the realignment of institutional offerings and resources in order to align with current and future fiscal realities. So I read that to mean exactly what it says, that it's not one-off projects that help for a while, that we really need joint projects that look at the underlying core issues and that help change that financial reality. We also know, I mentioned the NCHAMS report, we also know the seriousness with which NCHAMS took their assignment and the therefore thorough and helpful report that they produced. And on the comment, and Commissioner Yamasaki, you mentioned this too, but I wondered too about the phrasing of projects already funded that, while worth pursuing, fail to understand the potential or fully collaborate as a missed opportunity. And I heard your good response to that, Ben. I still think in looking at these that there is potentially a lot of room for collaboration, again, on the underlying issues and what all of the institutions need to do with room for individual adaptation in order to change that. So there's collaboration on process, and that's been excellent, but there's collaboration a little deeper down also. What we want at the conclusion of this, we want to see that level of collaboration. I think of all of this, these are all called projects, and I understand that, but I think of all of this work as a project. This is, we're not funding, or we shouldn't be funding one-off things, one-time efforts as projects. They should be something that contribute and across institutions that may be worthwhile, and that get to the problem. And in addition to the stakeholders already listed, which is a very good list and shows a lot of thought, we also need to make sure that every board is engaged in this. And Kimberly, you mentioned that, and I was very pleased to hear that. I don't know if that's true at all institutions, but we need to make sure they are. And also see evidence of that at the end of this process, evidence of the boards being engaged in the biggest issues. I also would hope that the boards get a copy from the leaders in the universities of the NCHAMS report. These institutions really are treasures for this state. They're essential in the communities, and they're critically important to the overall success of higher ed in Oregon. And I always think of opportunities, and this is an opportunity, especially with this money, that we cannot squander. It has to be used for big things. We can't afford to have these universities go from fragile financially to any of them being in crisis. So let's use this time and money we have now to realign, if necessary, the scope and range of the offerings at the school, as I know SOU has done and some others are in the process of doing, and decide how to best serve the students of the future. We are all, every one of us, partners in this work and in the future for these institutions. And I really thank you for the work done so far. And Commission, once we have a motion, I recommend approval. Are there any other questions for me or for anyone else before we get the motion and vote? Okay, can I have a motion, please?
I would make a motion to approve or support this recommendation.
I second.
Thank you, Commissioner Hayman. Is there a second? Okay, and any questions on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you to all our participants in making the time and putting in the concern for this. And if there is no other business to come before us, I will declare the meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Stan.
you, Chair.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.